This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight is a friend. He's been on the show before. He's from Hungary, Ben Toth. We're going to talk about the politics in Hungary. We're going to talk about the Prime Minister, Vikor Orban, incredible uh, leader, I think, in the EU, who is pissing off, making a lot of people angry in the EU, in the United States, and the globalists. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me, Regis. It's
Well,
the it's the most amazing time of my life when it comes to Europe in Hungary. So perfect occasion.
it's the most amazing time in my life. Uh, there's been a lot of amazing times, but this time is really quite amazing, quite incredible with everything that's happening where you live, where I live, and around the world. And I want to talk about some of those things tonight. But you being from Hungary, I would like for you to share what is going on there with viewers in the West and especially the United States and America. Uh, I have been following uh, Viktor Orban and what he's been doing and saying in the last few months. But first of all, Ben, tell me, who is this guy?
So,
Where did he come from? And does he have the support of the people in Hungary?
okay, let's start with Mr. Viktor Orban. He's a very interesting figure because most of my life, last time you had me on, I explained I'm a Hungarian communist. So I was born in the People's Republic, and I grew up to pretty much to hate this man, and that has flipped around in the last 2 years, like completely. But in the beginning, he was just a young yuppie student. 1989, he went on a Soros, Open Society's foundation grant to Oxford University, to Britain. He was going to be one of these globalist leaders, pre-planned, everything sorted, that you're going to be the next guy in Hungary. And then he came home in 1990 and he founded Fidesz, which at the time was basically a liberal sort of college protest camp, a protest organization. It wasn't a political party at that time. And he made his name by, at that time, in 1989, going to the burial of Nagy Imre Nagy, who was the traitor, who was supposed to be the Western installed puppet in 1956, the color revolution, which the Russians and the Hungarians beat down. So he made that, and he made demands. We want an open democratic election. We want all the Rusky soldiers, that were Soviets at the time, gone. And he put himself on the political map. And he was elected first in the late 90s. So I think 98. And his first pretty much order of business was getting us into NATO in 1999. And then he was out for a while. But since then, his party, with him at the head since all this time, has transformed into, most people call him far right or right wing, but that's a label they attach to everybody. It's a conservative, sort of Christian aligned party. He's been in power since 2010. What do you call it? Five governments already, but four consecutive. 2010, four consecutive. What is the word I am looking for?
Administrations.
Terms in office, yes, four consecutive administrations, which was in league with or in coalition with the Christians, the KDMP, Christian Democratic Forum, which is the Christian party. So he's looked at as this Central European Christian conservative. But what he's done since he was in office, since that NATO blunder, which I think he's beginning to realize, that's what we're living through. The painting is on the wall. It's sobering up from all that delusion of the 1990s, is, I think, what we're seeing. So he got rid of Soros and the Central European University. That was back in, I think, the 2010s, maybe 15. Right, he got rid of that. He's also persona non grata in Russia and in China, that guy. so it's not about anything else. Then he introduced the child protection laws based on the Russian model. None of that propaganda to the kids. We're all about the family here, traditional values, that sort of stuff. And finally, and that's the last straw, I think, which was beautiful, and this was just late November, so just maybe 3 weeks ago, he introduced this new bureau, the Hungarian Sovereignty Defense Bureau, which, when you look at it, at the time it was in Közlöny, which is where all the official, government news comes out in detail, the legal news. It was like a copy and paste of FARA, the Foreign Registration Act, right? In the US, it existed since 1938. You have to register as a foreign agent if you got like influx of foreign money coming in and you're represented in government or in media. And it has huge penalties. If you're in government and you get a huge amount of money from Brussels, for example, then you can be put into jail for years. If you're an organization, you could be disbanded. And just today, we could get back into what happened last week and the EU summit and all that, but just today I watched 2 pieces of news which are fantastic. Like, all of these Atlanticists, you call them globalists, they are fuming at this guy. Already he was the Hitler of Europe. He was Putin's guy, Putin's ally in Europe. Now he's the bridgehead of China in Europe, which is a whole new can of worms. But anyway, he's already been all those things. But right now, the Miller, I think he's called, the US State Department spokesperson, he put a little stub up on state.gov saying, we hate this protection bureau because now anybody who doesn't agree with official Hungarian politics can be silenced or something like that. And I saw a lot of these independent journalists, complaining about that. They can't get into his interview spaces and all that because, one after the other, I checked their outlets, and 2 out of 3 Hungarian news outlets are still anti-Orban, by the way. I checked them. They're like NED funding, Rockefeller Foundation funding, it's basically US money, but the German Marshall Fund, funding and all that. So he got rid of that, and everybody's pissed at them. Second piece, which is Bloomberg, mere hours ago. I forgot to send you that one, by the way, but he refused in some sort of, I think, Hungarian media setting to call the SMO that's been going on for almost 2 years a war. It's been agreed from the beginning. It's a war of aggression, the unprovoked war of aggression on Ukraine. He said, no, this is a military operation. And he added this, none of the 2 countries declared war. And if Russia declares war, you will fucking see war. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. That might be the YouTube monetization gone, but that was amazing. And all the usual suspects, EU Commissioner Ursula, the American, whoever, bobbleheads being completely angry at him. And how can he say this with all the blood spilled? So he's become the absolute rebel within the European Union. And I couldn't be happier about this. It was way past time to get some sort of house cleaning done in the neighborhood. It's basically him, Vucic in Serbia, who recently got elected. The EU has all knives out for him. That was an illegitimate. Check the results again. There's Fico, Robert Fico in Slovakia, who is a social democrat, so he can't even be called far right. He's the other one that says 0 funding to Ukraine. We've had enough of this. And in the east-south, there's this rebellion growing within the EU framework, and I'm just looking with hope in my eyes for the first time in 30 years, like what this could become.
Well, there's another one who's kind of a renegade, who's emerging from Slovakia, Robert Fico.
That was the last one he mentioned. Yeah, he's the social democrat. Fico, I think that's the pronunciation. Yeah.
Okay. So where I'm sitting, I'm looking at him, Robert Fico. I'm looking at Vucic, and I'm looking at Vikor Orban, who seem to be troublemakers
Yes.
for the EU and for NATO.
From their perspective.
They seem to be pissing off the United States and the Atlanticist or globalist. What does this represent in terms of unity or cracks in the EU, in your opinion? And one thing I was surprised, I think you said that Viktor Orban is a persona non grata in Russia. It was
No,
seen.
no, no. I was talking about the Open Societies Foundation, George
Ah,
Soros.
okay, George
Yeah,
Soros.
yeah.
So
Same.
Orban, and these other guys, Fico and Vucic, must be viewed in Russia in very favorable terms. But tell me a little bit more about the cracks in the EU.
Well, let's start with yes, he's favorable. I think it was maybe October that I was very, very happy that Orban flew to Beijing, which was the Belt and Road Forum, and he had a side meeting with Vladimir Putin, and all of the Eurocrats they were frothing at the mouth. How could you look at the what's the usual term they use because of the ICC thing? The war criminal sitting in the room with him. But okay, to your topic, the cracks. What's amazing to me is last time we spoke, you asked me how long does the EU have? I don't think NATO was included in that, but how long? I thought, with some luck, maybe in my lifetime, I'm just 40, so maybe in 20, 30 years, this thing will crack. That process has accelerated incredibly fast in this year alone, especially the second half of this year, when it became obvious, I think, to everybody, every onlooker, especially military analysts, that this whole counteroffensive thing is dead. All of those billions of euros and dollars that went to it, it's just gone. And suddenly, the US, you probably watched the latest news from them. Like first, it was the Republicans who said, "No, we can't fund this thing because we're tying it to immigration." That was the excuse. But we're not funding it. We're not giving you that 60 billion US dollars. Then there was the EU summit last week, where Mr. Orban alone vetoed I think, over 5 years, 60 billion euros to fund the project of the yellow and blue nation to our east. And I think there's a realization here, not among Baerbock, Ursula Habeck, these people, a gynecologist, a children's book author, and a majorette athleticist dancer. These are idiots. They're not trained people. But there's a realization that Project Ukraine has absolutely failed. And what happens next is it looks like the US is dropping it in the lap of an already pretty much bankrupt Europe. I mean, the German press, not to single it out because it's the same for Britain, it's the same for even like havens. We used to think of them like Sweden, like the bankruptcies are speeding up. I just watched a video of the fourth metallurgical plant, steel plant in Germany, produced the last steel pipe, and people with their hats off, sort of giving salute to them, because then the plant is going to close and they're without a job. That was the industrial heart of Europe, and it's going bankrupt. And what they're doing is the same that the US is doing. In the US, it's called the debt ceiling. And here I think it's called the debt brake or something. And they're trying to reform it so they can get further into debt to fund Ukraine. And they're seeing this is the end of Project Ukraine. It's going to cost billions and billions just to keep this corrupt shithole running for the next years. And now they have to do it without the US. So they're thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? How am I going to survive this? Thinking about their little nations for Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, which is just north of us. It's pretty much a block. I mean, if they had some brains, the whole Balkan Peninsula would right now orient to the east to get out of this alive. But I don't know if you wanted some deeper analysis of that. But the process has sped up so much. Like even the established these Western NGO funded Oxford or US trained idiots are seeing the writing on the wall that's saying, okay, now what do we do now that the US seems to say? It was Blinken the other day who said, well, that Ukraine is not going to need this kind of aid from us anymore. They can do it on their own. I mean, the Washington Post yesterday, their main menu, their nav bar, it had war in Ukraine there for 2 years. They just removed it. Okay, it's gone. I mean, all of these signs are there, and the people who said, okay, I've been with you with this project since day one, which Orban was. He went along with all the sanctions. He declared it an unprovoked aggression for the first year, saying all of that was a lie. Ukraine winning winning all the time, winning big is a lie. How do we get out of this? And that's increasing. I mean, right now it's to the south and east. Maria Zakharova said the other day that the north of Europe is increasingly unfortunately, under US domination. And the West, the original heart of Europe, Spain, France, Germany, the big guys, they're just melting economically. And of course, the Middle Eastern troubles are just adding to their pain. But I wonder if, as you remember, I ramble. So I wonder if you want to zoom in on any aspect of that, because I could just.
Well, I do. Um, what I am wondering about, and wondering if I'm seeing it accurately, are there are cracks in the EU.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's obvious. It's not just coming from the countries that we just mentioned, Hungary, Serbia, Slovakia. I think it's coming from Germany, who is being tremendously devastated economically and their industrial base. Italy, you can go all the way over to Portugal and Spain. You can go to the Netherlands. You can go to Sweden. You can go to Finland. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people, grassroots people, beginning to resist what their governments are doing. My question to you, because I think this is an important value for Russia, and I think China, but I'll talk about Russia, is the sacredness of the sovereignty of all countries. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think when all of these European countries joined the EU, they sacrificed their sovereignty.
They did. They did indeed.
I'm wondering if they are beginning to realize that it's their sovereignty, their history, their culture, their values, their uniqueness are what is really important for their future. Am I just stretching this a little bit too much, or do you think that is also at play among the people of the European countries, West and East?
No, I think there's you can see evidence for that pretty much every day. I mean, I don't know if in this show we can present or share a screen, because I really wish we had a map for some of these things. So I don't know if you can bring that on screen, but that's my little, unfortunately it doesn't have labels, but that's my little map. So in the east, right, we are Hungary. Right here you can see the cursor. That's Slovakia, that's Poland, and this is our border with Ukraine. All of that is locked. There are miles and miles of what do you call them, lorries, trucks, that are not allowed either way. And that's because of the cheap Ukraine grain. If it flooded our agricultural neighborhood, it would pretty much put farmers out of work. And EU laws would grant them in there. And Poland is now pretty much, even under this new European sort of, what do you call it, a bureaucrat guy, says no fucking way to that. They want a 20-year ban on agricultural products from Ukraine. If you go to the West, obviously, France is prone to protest over anything. They burn buses, all that. But Germany is not. And even in Germany, in Berlin, the other day, I saw thousands. You can check these videos, on Telegram, on X. As long as it's available in Europe, it might not be for a long time. Miles and miles of tractors, because they just got a new budget, and a whole lot of subsidies for German agriculture just went away for the fuel, for heating, for the fuel of agricultural machinery. And they said, we can't compete under this. And they're going to want their government, these, what do you call it, the traffic light coalition, Greens, Libertarians, and Social Democrats. They want these idiots out who are having trouble, with each other, with their plan for the future. There was a very revealing, I think it was a CDU, as in Social Democrat guy, member of the Bundestag, the German parliament, the other day, saying for the energy transition, it's their holy Bible. It's not the same as ecological civilization in China. It's their green mania. They're anti-nuclear, they're anti-everything. They said for our transition to be successful, we need our own lithium reserves. And the closest lithium reserves we could have are in Donetsk and Lugansk. This was a TV interview on German television, and I found it. And okay, that plan is ruptured. So all of these places, I mean, there's mass unrest against the leadership because they did give up a lot. I met a German a German person a couple of weeks ago. He said, "I just want what's best for Germany, but I see Germany disappearing." He said that. So I think this could be more widespread than before. And for context, in Hungary, things are calm. You don't see the big protests. I wanted to show you this because this is half a liter of propane butane natural gas bottled in Szeged in Hungary. This is about 500 forints, right? So that's the value of a loaf of bread, a kilogram, or the quarter of a pack of cigarettes. In Germany, this has become a status symbol. It's just a bottle of gas because the prices are so insane because they've been forced to buy, from American or recycled, basically India, coming through India, but Russian gas and all that for 8 times the price. It's really becoming impressive. But in Hungary, back to my place, Pécs, it used to be a red city, as in a socialist kind of place. And just the last year, I'm beginning to see not just the old stupid Western T-shirts, Marvel, Coca-Cola, NASA, that sort of shit. I'm beginning to see anti-EU T-shirts, like more and more. And people say, "Hey, you're right," and there's a huge sentiment among the people saying we've been screwed by this shit. We've been members for almost 30 years, 26, I think. And life hasn't got better. If you look at just our demographic situation within Hungary, it's just gone down and down and down and down, as in less and less people. And this could be a new beginning for us, actually stretching out towards Turkey, towards China, and I think through that Russia. I think that's what Orban is doing, because Orban is not a trained statesman like Vladimir Putin, who came from the KGB, who had foreign assignments. He's not like Lavrov, like 30 years a diplomat, absolutely trained. He just got into this sort of opportunistically, but he got into this 25 years ago. So he knows the game. He knows the inside horse trading within the EU among countries, and he's basically a smaller Erdogan. Okay, it's time to play the East against the West. If you want to hate us, hate us. You've hated us for, 20 years, and I've been in power for 13. So what the hell are you going to do? You can write your headlines. Nobody cares. Now I'm actually going to go my way. And I think the whole EU project could be in jeopardy because of this, because it's the US project, the US designed project. So I think in 10, 15 years, hopefully, we could see a US withdrawal from this continent. And then there's a lot of formerly rich, colonial powers who will have to think, what now? Our security was guaranteed by the US, our raw resources by Russia, and the biggest market in the world by China. So what do we do now without the coercive big brother? And I think we're going increasingly that way. This is not objective. This is just my evaluation of how the continent's doing.
You mentioned Erdogan. Wow, you talk about somebody who straddles the fence. He's been playing both sides. Um, I have questioned why Vladimir Putin continues to be friends with him when he stabbed him in the back on 2 or 3 occasions. But what about Orban receiving Erdogan and getting gas from the Turkestan pipeline? What's going on with that? That also uh, is very interesting.
Well, the reason, as you can see, I'm not heating the place up to full, like, Moscow hotels where you have to open the window, but our gas prices have been the cheapest in all European nations, I think, consistently throughout 2023. And there's a reason for that. These the players around us, there's this big pipeline. I don't want to go back to the map, but Druzhba pipeline came through Ukraine. First, they started to hike rates, then they just stopped the flow. There was another string of it that went through Belarus to Poland, and Poland has been screaming about that, and they wanted to increase the transit fees. But right now, Russian oil and gas flows to us at a very affordable rate, as opposed to Western and Northern Europe, through the Turk Stream pipeline. which comes through Turkey, up through Bulgaria, Serbia, all the way to Hungary. That is the future. And what Erdogan and Orban celebrated, he was here this week. It was a wonderful media thing to behold, because Orban gave him a horse, a beautiful, one of those rare breeds of horse. He's called Aristocrat. And he got one of these Turkish-made EV, as in electric limousines back. And I think Turk Who Turk 001 or 100, that was the license plate, the friendship of the nations, even though at the time of the Ottoman Empire, we were kind of opposites. But anyway, he got this in exchange for the horse. And his post was the 1 horsepower for 500. I forget the exact 435. Sorry, that was it. So he welcomed him, and that's because there was this gas hub idea. It was born in Russia that it should go through Turkey, because all of these northern little states become unreliable. Then maybe this is the way to power at least the Balkan Peninsula, the southern and eastern and central part of Europe, and we are benefiting from that greatly. That's why, to us, if you go on just national interest, none of these values, none of the big squats, it is beneficial. Turkey is also a good investor and good supplier in Hungary. But what we also have is a major nuclear, our number 1 nuclear facility in Poksh, and that is being expanded and fueled by Rosatom, by the Russian nuclear agency. And that's why we got an exemption from every single sanctions package on energy, including nuclear, because we want, we recognize, I think, in a realistic way, in an economic way, but we can't survive with all this infrastructure built in the last 30 years without Russia, without basically that influence coming from through Turkey, and basically the new industrial power of the world, more industrial capacity than all the countries combined, which is China. And that's why the latest what do you call it, the European slang or the way to berate us is we are becoming an acid colony of Russia, of China, sorry, a bridgehead for Chinese influence within Europe. And by the way, Orban uses that too. We want to be a bridgehead for Chinese influence within Europe because we see it as beneficial. And so do the Chinese. Win-win cooperation, it's their mantra. So again, I ramble. I'm sorry, I forgot where the question began. Was it just Erdogan's visit? And
Well, yeah, but it hasn't really been a ramble. It's really interesting that countries like Hungary, Serbia, Slovakia, Turkey are placing their country's interest first,
mm,
the interest of their people and the economies. And this is why I thought at the beginning that the EU is beginning to crack. The relationship between the EU and the United States is also fraying big time because countries are beginning to realize, wait a minute, our interests are not being served here. And I am just hoping that people in Germany, people in Italy, and across Europe this winter realize, not only with the price of gas, which they're not benefiting like you are in Hungary, but with the economic collapse, recession, maybe depression, what is hanging over them. And so I think I see a ray of hope in
same.
your countries, Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia, and Turkey, uh, beginning to challenge the American hegemonic domination of Europe. I can only hope it continues and it spreads. Now, one thing I want to ask you, because this, what's his name, Borrell, who's the ambassador for the EU,
High representative is basically the foreign minister of the EU.
foreign
Yeah,
minister.
the
I think
gardener, right?
you can correct me if I'm wrong. He told Viktor Orban, "Why don't you go out and have a coffee?" And Orban went out and had a coffee, and they did this immediate vote about Ukraine. Tell me about that. I mean, I can't imagine that Orban was not furious. And I'm wondering how the people of Hungary even reacted to that.
I don't know how all Hungarians reacted to that, but I was watching live as this thing came in through different channels. So this was the big EU summit where they were supposed to decide who gets, I think, accelerated accession to the EU, which Turkey has been a candidate country since the early 2000s and still hasn't got in. I don't think they're ever going to, but it's still a symbolic victory because if the US leaves, Ukraine in the ditch, EU financially leaves Ukraine in the ditch, we have to have something, a symbol of hope. That's what that vote was about. It was about, but it was this major, like, imagine this diplomatic event. It smells like sweat and coffee because you're in there for 12 hours. And three Europeans already came out to take credit for the fact that Orban stepped out because he's not going to allow it. He was very loud about it for months, in fact, that Europe should, Ukraine cannot become a candidate country in the EU. It will bankrupt us. It will get us right into a war. I think perfectly sane reasons, but he said he's not going to vote for it. It's not in our interest. It's a stupid vote. That's ridiculous. That he's been voicing that all along. And then three people came ahead. One was Olaf Scholz, right? He said, I got him out of the room to get a little coffee and look how clever I am, because all the others, wink, wink, nod, nod, the 23 other EU nations then voted to get Ukraine this accelerated admittance to the EU. And they got that win, by the way. But then voices the next day came out. One was Miss Annalena 360 degrees Baerbock, one of the stupidest people in all of Europe, I think, who said, no, it was me. It was a very planned, I don't think she used operation, but a planned coffee diplomacy or something like that. And there was a third that I just don't have in front of me. But three people took, like, look how good I am. I got Hungary out of the room. Okay. Within half an hour, I saw a video from Orban on his social media. He's on Twitter, X, and Facebook, and he said Hungary did not want to partake in this ridiculous vote. It is not in our interest to do so, so we let the others basically sink their own ship. That's paraphrasing, but that was what Orban said. It's a stupid vote. And then he got back, and within the next 10 hours, two things were voted upon. The 12th round of sanctions, which was shot down by, I think, Austria, Mr. Nehammer, the Chancellor of Austria, and the big 40 billion euro funding for Ukraine for 5 years. And that was shot down by Orban himself, saying, no, that's ridiculous. Even more recently, he put forward at the EU level a proposal that Ukraine should not be funded for the next 20 years because it would basically, the ECB, the European Central Bank, which is in Germany, not in Brussels, would go bankrupt. We're not the US. We can't just print euros, Deutschmark 2.0s, because it's tethered to another currency. It's not the world reserve as the others are. I mean, he sees clearly what the printing of money does to the US, even though you are secured by basically exporting the inflation to all the client nations that have to trade with your currency. The euro doesn't do that. It just got overtaken by the renminbi, the yuan, the Chinese yuan, in international settlements and trade. It's becoming irrelevant. So are the European leaders. So that was the big EU summit. And that's pretty much my experience of how it all went down. But the next day, basically, Nehammer, the Austrian guy who vetoed the 12th sanction package, he vetoed it because an Austrian bank, Raiffeisen, which, by the way, we have all over in Hungary, a problem with the Hungarian economic, the way it's set up for the last 20 years. Anyway, that got off the sponsors of war list that Ukraine has. Our bank is still on it, Multiple Bank. Anyway, that got off, and he said, okay, we can do the sanctions package. So we have a 12th sanctions package going after diamonds. And also one person on that is Dmitry Medvedev, like the Russian people's poet. I love what this guy has been doing for 2 years on his Telegram and other places. And his son, his 27-year-old son, is on that sanctions list because he's the son of Medvedev. So it's just petty, stupid. And by the way, I think Lavrov said, the foreign minister of Russia, how is just an EU customs officer supposed to tell what the origin of a diamond is? it's just like, it's ridiculous. It's like the oil price ceiling. This is what the EU is engaged in now. More sanctions, more all the voices that don't agree with us. They're in a row with Twitter, X, by the way, saying all the disinformation has to stop, or maybe we're going to kill it in Europe, which I'm afraid of. Like that's what the Europe is engaged in: full censorship of any other voice, any voices of sanity. And the East is saying, "Fuck off! We've had enough of this. We've had more than enough of it. If you want us to leave," which a mighty country of Lithuania has recommended, that if Hungary can't abide by EU values, then it should leave the union altogether. And if you look at Banderastan and what Ukraine is, or even what Israel is doing today, you can see these EU values on display fully. And they want to strip Hungary of the voting rights within the EU. That's their answer to everything. That's their answer to Serbia as well, which, it's a clean election, which is just won like an overwhelming 80% or something of the vote. No, it was illegitimate. That's what they're doing.
I want to ask you about this the EU convention or summit, that there was a movement to try to deprive Orban and Hungary of their vote. What was that all about? Was that successful? I mean, when you talk about a palace revolt, when you talk about trying to silence one of the members of the union, this to me indicates there's something terribly wrong uh, in this organization.
Freedom, democracy, human rights. Those news posts and using some sort of archaic article somewhere in the EU Charter, they came out after the summit. So pretty much this week, we have to strip Hungary of its voting rights within the EP, the European Parliament, and all of these like massive institutions in Brussels. So I mean, this is the freedom and democracy and human rights. I think that's just dead now. Nobody sees it for what it is. I mean, it's like the US. That's their mantra that Europe kind of inherited. But what are they trying to do? They're trying to get Trump off the ballot in like 18 states. They got him off in Colorado. But you're voting for democracy. This is democracy, and the ones we don't like, they're just not going to be a choice. They're not going to be on the ballot, and that's pretty much what they're doing. They're screwing Hungary. You don't have interest. I mean, it was last autumn, maybe September, when do you remember the Italian Giorgia Meloni got elected prime minister? And at that time, she was anti-NATO, anti-intervention, or as in anti-aid to Ukraine. That was her platform. And then Ursula, this wicked witch of the EU, European Council president or some sort of title like that. She's nothing but a clerk, okay? She's got 7 children. 5 of them live in the fucking US. No, she was never voted in. She's not a representative of anyone. She's just put there. That's what Ursula. And she said, we have tools. If the election goes not the way we want, we have tools. I didn't know what she meant at the time, but like within a month, Giorgia Meloni became fundamentalist Ukraine stand. We have to defend freedom and democracy from the Russian trolls, the orcs in Ukraine. She became fully Atlanticist. NATO is our purely defensive organization. It's going to safeguard Europe, and it was an unprovoked, horrible invasion. Within months, she got transformed. So I wonder what these tools are, but these tools are not democratic in any shape or form. I mean, that's what Europe has transformed into. I hate to use people, who grew up in circles that spewed out anti-communism since the 1980s. That's where the word authoritarianism was born. Hannah Arendt, the authoritarian personality, fascism is our personalities. Stalin, happy birthday, Stalin, by the way, was one of these authoritarians. That's horrible. That's bad. We need freedom. And this is what they have. It's autocracy more than anything else. You do what we like, what the United States like, or we have tools to undermine you every step of the way. And I think that's bound to fail, even if they don't start ejecting nations like maybe Hungary, Serbia, Slovakia, maybe the Czechs, because Mr. Pavel, who was a huge hawk, Petr Pavel, who also comes from the communist era where he was some sort of high-ranking military guy. He was absolutely like brain deadly anti-Russia. Like Ukraine is going to defeat Russia. We're going to slice up. We're going to be in Moscow. He was like the Poles in that regard, the previous Polish government. Even he's thinking, oh shit, what happens now if we fail? Even without these countries exiting right now, I think a project like this, where there's this central diktat on everything, including information, descent of information, the votes, the economic, the foreign policy matters, you follow this or fuck you. That just can't, it can't adapt to change, and it can't stay together. I mean, there's too many contradictions, east, west, north, south. It's been pulled apart. Can I quote Vladimir Putin to you? He recently had, I think in the news it was the board of military leaders, but I think it's the collegiate in Russia or something like that, where he awarded the heroes of Russia. And he said this following line, which I think is telling, it's beautiful. The US has pulled Russia and Europe apart, shifting the load of financial responsibility for the situation on Ukraine on the latter. Meanwhile, the weak-willed, spineless generation of today's politicians in Europe cannot stand against this. It's very true. The continent, especially the Union, has lost sovereignty. Absolutely. I mean, the East is showing signs of, yeah, we have our own interests, we have our own destinies we should pursue, but the West, it's completely true. By the way, Putin, in that very same, I think he had interviews after, he picked out Slovakia and Hungary. He said, these are not pro-Russia nations by any stretch of the imaginations. They're not anti-Russia. They are pro-nationalist. They are pro their own people. And I really like that he plucked out these two from the rest of these, as he said, spineless generations of today's leaders.
Yeah, that was an amazing quote, and he's had a number of really good ones lately, really condemning the spineless people in the EU and the United States. And you know, as somebody born in the United States, um, I could no longer live there with all of the lies and fallacies that they were spewing about other countries' violations of democracy, denial of democracy, violations of human rights. When you look at the history of my country, there's no comparison with any other country in the world, not even the British colonial empire, who has more violated the rights of indigenous people all over the world for the last 500 or 600 years. None more than the United States of America. They're even denying the people in the United States their human rights, their rights protected by the Constitution of the United States. I could no longer live there in that swamp and watch the political chaos and dysfunction that we're seeing today. And you mentioned the Democrats, the DNC, trying to eliminate Trump completely from the ballot, and they claim to be a democratic country. I'm not speaking in favor of Trump. I'm just talking about this is not a country that is based on freedom.
I agree. Whatever someone's opinion about Trump is, good or bad, he or she should have the right to choose, right? And that's been taken away. It's been taken off. That's just like
Yeah.
horrific.
So I want to ask you. I want to ask you another question. It's very important, I think. And you mentioned that in some of the notes that you sent me, uh, Hungary is getting cozy with China.
Mm.
What is that all about?
Basically, we are the opposite of, there's a Latin American country, Argentina, way down in the south, where Javier Milei, an absolute crazed, I think he calls himself anarcho-capitalist, got elected. And sorry, I'm getting somewhere. I want to contrast the two countries. because he got into there saying we're going to dollarize, we're going to base everything on the U.S. economy. His first act was privatize everything, the state-owned oil enterprise, airlines, all the land can be owned by foreign corporations. And then he turned to China, and he had this currency swap agreement. It was refreshed, I think, in November by the previous prime minister, between him and China, saying, look, we need this currency swap in order to pay off all our debts, because basically what my program is to get out of the IMF and World Bank debt. I'm going to need more IMF and World Bank debt, and China, can you help me out? And Xi Jinping, to his absolute credit, said, fuck off. That deal has been exhausted. You can go wherever you want. I see you for what you are, a puppet, a client regime to the US. And as such, no, sir, you don't deserve any of our help. Hungary, on the other hand, because it's showing the signs that we are not answering to any foreign power, be that the US or its clients in Brussels, they say, okay, how can we help? And we've got, like, I could list these things, but all of the major, like NEO, BYD, the Build Your Dream, electric vehicle mega firms in China have announced new investments, new manufacturing plants, battery plants here in the industrial regions of Hungary. You know, the Belt and Road Initiative, which also, by the way, Viktor Orban's government joined us into 2010s, but I don't know the exact year. But we've been there for 10 years, which, by the way, Giorgia Meloni, when she was voted in, she got Italy out of. I'm sure the Chinese must be crying without that Italian, I don't know, luxury wear, whatever the Italians do, other than 2 sports cars a year. Anyway, we got in. And we said, okay, we need alternatives to this U.S. hegemony. These absolutely, I love that they use that Chinese debt is predatory. When we got our first IMF loan under a socialist government, and just recently finished paying it off, it was crippling. We were in this debt trap, and we need alternatives. And China has that. It's got the, Dilma Rousseff is in charge of it. I always call it the BRICS Bank, but it's the New Development Bank or something like that. It can give comparable loans with much, much better terms. It can give your nation. I mean, if this continent were sane, then that's only what Hungary, but the whole continent should do it, is start building from the west these major highways, major high-speed rail links, all the way to the middle in Mongolia. And China and Russia would start to build them from the east, and we'd meet in the middle. And this continent would be unbeatable, I think, in economic terms. It would be the unchallengeable economic superpower in the world. But because of this divide and rule that, as you said, your nation is mostly responsible for, like out of 200 or 300 years of existence, I don't know the stat offhand, but maybe there was 10 that the US was not at war with, because everywhere it goes, it does this. You divide. Look at the case study of how they destroyed Yugoslavia. 6 brotherly people creating a shared country, shared prosperity, was destroyed and torn apart. That was the plan for Russia. But now that it's obvious to everyone that it didn't work, Russia didn't get balkanized. There was no Moscow Maidan. Putin is now not out of power. They didn't rebel and create like 15 constitute republics in the place of mighty Russia. Now they don't have a plan B. And okay, Hungary says, we do. We want to go to the east where it looks like the star of the East is rising. I mean, the economic heart of the world. I mean, let's say 17 out of 20 centuries has been in China, and it's just only natural for it to return. And as you know, Russia and China are becoming, I'm not saying one country, they're never one cultures, because each country has like 50 or 60 different cultures. But in economic terms, in military terms, it's closer than any alliance. It's the closest partnership in the world. And we want a piece of that. We'd like to be part of that future instead of what's sinking to the west of us. Did that answer your question?
Well, it leads me to this. Uh, Putin and Xi, before the Beijing Olympics, both came out in a statement and said what we have is more than an alliance. And in these last couple of years, it has intensified, it has increased. And the Belt and Road Initiative, the Putin, who's been the champion for multipolarity, for a new world order, for BRICS, even more than Xi, uh, are looking at, and what I keep saying is so important, and I hope that the European countries can continue to wake up. It's a new world based on the sovereignty of all nations, equality of all nations, regardless of how big or small, development, development of all nations. This is a new hope. It's a new paradigm that is 180 degrees opposite of the United States paradigm of world domination. I think that more and more countries are beginning to wake up
I hope
and
so.
realize that their sovereignty will be respected in a new world order. The
I
other,
know we're approaching the hour mark, but can I add like two or three comments just on exactly what you said now,
yeah,
which gives me a
of course, it's
cool.
your show. It's your show.
No, we're having a chat. I just wanted to say that I think the Western European leaders, the Atlanticists, who mostly go to Oxford or go to the US for basically university studies, then come back and basically a comprador class, they have to be shamed into recognizing that they are basically either becoming irrelevant or they become completely sovereign. And there's three pieces. I mean, Vladimir Putin already said that Europe currently is incapable of making sovereign decisions, and the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Mao Ning, the spokesperson, the female one, not the other guy, uh, they're polite, but they urged multiple times for Europe to please first pursue full autonomy, full sovereignty, and then we can be a reliable partner to each other. Basically, get out of the yoke of the under the yoke of the U.S. And the other piece which I loved. It's two pieces of news which I watched side by side. I think they were like close to the same day, maybe 2 or 3 days apart. I always want to say Nehammer because he's the Austrian one, but the president of Germany, he's called. Nice. Just Google anyway, the president of Germany, not the chancellor, not the president. His plane touched down in Qatar, the Qatari airbase, right? And he just stood there at the top of the rails in his little airplane, waiting for someone to show up on the tarmac. That's how fucking irrelevant they've become. And about 2 days later, Vladimir Putin, in his recent tour of the Middle East, he went to the United Arab Emirates, and I hope you've seen that song and dance that awaited him. Rifles firing, camels, horses, the tricolor of the Russian flag in the sky with jets.
Yeah, yeah,
Europeans wanted to desperately believe that Russia is isolated. I'm telling you, Russia is isolated. The economy is in tatters. And then they see this, the reality check. And third, this was from German media saying, we want to decouple or de-risk. There was this, not Bloomberg, but that variant in Germany, like a financial press said, we think that we can decouple. It's doable. It's feasible. It would hurt China more. And China didn't even respond to this. It didn't even dignify it with a response. Okay, that's what you want to do, Germany. I think these are wonderful currents.
yeah. You know, the one thing I want to point out that I believe, I'd like your opinion. A lot of people in America, okay, these policymakers are characterizing both China and Russia as being imperialist countries, that they want to expand and absorb other countries, uh, that that Russia and China are bent on world domination. But it's a matter of fact that China has never been that kind of a country, has never been a militaristic country. Russia, apart from the Soviet era, has not been an imperialistic type of country, but certainly since Putin took office in 2000, the Russian Federation has not been bent on any kind of world domination, has not been bent on absorbing or recreating the Soviet Union. I don't know how many times Putin has to say it. That's not our plan. And not only his words, but his actions have indicated just the opposite of that. And so I'd like your final thoughts on the Russia China partnership. Do you have any fears that Russia and China are trying to replace the United States of America as the world hegemon?
I think you have to A, just not know history, and B, be completely just brainwashed by press to believe that they're imperialist powers, you know, hell bent on dominating all the others around them, like the US admittedly has. They never, if you look at the history of China, the last time they went to war was with Vietnam. By the way, that was not yet Mao's, sorry, that was the last time. Zero intervention, zero drones, zero war. Okay, Russia, neither of these countries had any. Russia intervened twice. Like one was Chechnya, right, to safeguard
Right?
again the unity of Russia, and the second one was Ukraine to safeguard Russian lives. It was basically a military rescue operation, and you can see it to this day because these inter-imperialists, they say this is an inter-imperial war. Some very, very stupid people. They don't even notice what's the difference between a defensive army and an offensive army. You know, it's just, if you look at the Donbass and you can see videos of the reconstruction, not just of Mariupol, the roads, the new health centers, the new. I mean, we could go a whole other episode of the internal changes within Russia, which I see as incredible. That also gives me hope. But just on the international scene, what use does Russia have for the three Baltic midgets? You know, absolute Nazi collaborators. Lithuania was the one nation of collaborators which was marked Judenfrei, as in they exterminated all their Jews. Not even Germany did that. Not even, you know, some other nations. But they, why would they have any need for that? By the way, Vladimir Putin made some other observations very recently about the west of Ukraine, you know, where Lvov is. And, you know, because it's Europe, everybody, all kinds of people have border disputes and claims and said, look, if Hungary wants that, we don't. That little part, which is called Transcarpathia, the Slovakians want the others, or the Polish wants their historic part around Lvov. We don't care. We were the only ones who safeguarded the integrity of Ukraine, and we will no longer do it. But we warn Poland that what Stalin took away, he also gave. You know, when Stalin said this belongs to Ukraine, he also gave a lot of German land on the west of Poland to Poland, and saying, if you call your borders into question, you might be surprised at the can of worms your history will open. That's the history of Europe, all of these border disputes. Within Russia, I've been researching all the constituent republics. There's the most Buddhist state in the world. There's Karelia, I think, inherited from the Finns. There's so many different peoples, folks, even religions. You know, Chechnya is by no means orthodox, and I wish the future of Europe was something like Russia or China. You know, a federation of republics that can get along. I would like a future in that multipolar world. Last thought. What also died, and we didn't really have time or got into Gaza and Israel. What also died there was this notion that the United Nations is independent or has a will of its own. And this week, for the first time on RT, Russia Today, I saw an article saying, what will be, I mean, how the UN failed and what future organizations can it be replaced with? So I'm thinking there will be an actual, what the UN was meant to be, a place where people can settle disputes without war, a place where tribunals, like war crime tribunals, will be held for the criminals in Ukraine. And again, I'm sorry, you remember this, I rambled. The question was, Yeah, sovereignty and multipolarity. I would bet 10 times out of 10 on Russia and China based on their histories. And no, it's not re-becoming the Soviet Union. It's just what Russia has become is the champion of those under the boot. That's what Russia has become. And a lot of the global south is seeing it exactly in that light, no matter what the Europeans or the Americans say.